Welcome to Behind the Ballot, where politics meets real life. We break down state and federal issues, showing how policy shapes everyday Americans. I'm your host, Mikkel Jenkins, and today we're diving into a full onslaught of a lot of chaos that's been going on, a little bit circling around the tariff refund battle, the Supreme Court versus Trump, looking at additional rulings that the Supreme Court will take up, and also looking at midterm momentum shifts and wanting to get started with the tariff fallout as it continues. Just today, the Tariff Refund Act of 2026 was introduced by Senate Democrats in response to the grueling 6-3 Supreme Court ruling, which invalidated President Trump's EPA-based tariffs. The bill mandates U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, refund an estimated 175 billion in unlawfully collected duties, including interest to importers, with 180 days of enactment, prioritizing small businesses and manufacturers to alleviate the economic strain from elevated prices pressed onto consumers and entities. This bill was sponsored by Senators Ron Wyden and Edward Markey and Janine Shaheen, with co-sponsorships from 19 additional Democrats, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. The bill requires the CBP to reliquidate previously finalized entries to facilitate refunds without imposing additional administrative hurdles that could disadvantage smaller importers. And to ensure transparency and efficiency, the legislation directs CBP to coordinate with the Small Business Administration for outreach, providing information and technical support to small businesses on the refund process, while mandating monthly reports to congressional committees such as the Senate Finance Committee, Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, and their House counterparts, detailing the number of refunds issued, amounts dispersed, which will be broken down by small businesses versus others, and estimated completion timelines until all payments are fulfilled. Additionally, the bill requires CBP to issue guidance within 60 days on handling duty backdraw claims related to these tariffs, and it expresses a sense of Congress urge for importers, wholesalers, and large corporations who often pass these tariffs to customers and consumers like myself and our listeners. And hopefully they're looking to redistribute these refunds downstream to affected small businesses and families, framing this as a corrective measure against Trump's policies amid broader Democratic efforts to block further tariff expansions under the alternative solutions that Trump has been pushing, like Section 122 of the Trade Act and also Section 301 as well. And this push really aligns with Democratic criticisms of the tariffs as an illegal tax scheme. Me and Mohammed have been talking about how these tariffs were already going to be deemed legal once they were initially announced, given the Liberation Day in April. And then this is only exacerbated by inflation and harmed working families, with senators like Wyden emphasizing the need to rein in executive overreach on trade, while the administration has halted collections but reinstated immediate refunds, resisted against immediate refunds, setting up a lot of legal confrontations as Democrats you try to use this leverage on the issue for midterm gains in certain battleground states. And Democrats will not vote to continue the tariffs after the 150 days, or even leading up to the 150-day threshold that President Trump has with Section 122. And even Johnson has stated that there wouldn't be any appetite for tariff legislation or any legislation to expand these tariffs. He specifically stated that it's going to be, I think, a challenge to find consensus on any path forward on the tariffs on the legislative side. And so that is why I think you see much more attention on the executive side, the executive branch, of what they're doing and how they're reacting to the ruling and all the rest. And we've seen what the reactions have been. And Muhammad is joining us now. And we've kind of seen what those reactions have been. Muhammad was going into, we just kind of covered the first section, looking into the tariff fallout. And I was just finishing up kind of the conversation, looking at kind of the feedback that the president has received about his tariffs and how a lot of senators and Democrats are obviously going to be against this, and even members in his own party maybe against wanting to vote on this as the midterms are coming up. As we were speaking the other day, we were saying this was almost a saving grace to Republicans to not have to stand on this issue come the midterms, but it seems like very much so they're going to have to, because Trump is going to want this pushed one way or another. And with Johnson stating that there is no appetite for this, it's going to be interesting to see what Senate Leader Thune says as well when it comes to if there's going to be bills put up for votes within the next couple of months for extending these tariffs. But we will see what happens, because the approval ratings are pretty much in the gutter
Yeah.
for not just Trump, but his handling of the economy and his handling of the tariffs, which we're going to get into as well. But Mohammed, thank you for jumping on with us for today.
No, thank you for having me as usual, Mikhail. Sorry for joining a little bit late, but I'm glad to be able to be part of the podcast as usual, as you know. But what I think is interesting about this all is the 6 month deadline for this, because if this
Yeah.
is put in a state of when it would be coming around, falling out midterms, and the Republicans could really just try to, and they probably will, honestly, try to like kick the can down the road until they see how midterms officially turn out. And I think if what they expect to happen happens, I think they may try to change the party's pace and go against Trump. Whereas I think if falling from here 6 months from now will be August, which would be a few months before the midterm elections. Honestly, I'd expect them to just still toe the line with him and go with what he does, and I don't think it'll end well at all.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna. I don't think it's gonna end well for really anyone in the GOP right now, with this whole tariff catastrophe running rampant, and really trying to figure out what they're gonna do. And really, as Speaker Johnson was saying, that's why you're seeing the executive branch mostly try to focus on this, because it seems that they really don't want to have lawmakers try to fight for this as the midterms go in full force. And as you know, they start doing town halls and things of that nature. This is going to be a very strong focal point for a lot of constituents that are looking to vote, whether it's for the incumbent that's within their state, or an outside challenger who does not have the baggage of these tariffs and of MAGA as well.
Yeah.
And wanting to turn to electoral expansion and kind of diving into what Gavin Newsom has been saying. So he's delivered a candid message to the Democratic Party, something along the lines that Obama was speaking to, in a way, urging for the Democratic Party to adopt a more culturally normal approach by focusing less on identity politics and pronouns, and more on everyday concerns like electricity bills, childcare, healthcare, and housing costs, arguing that this shift is essential for broadening the appeal and reclaiming lost ground in upcoming elections, which I definitely agree with. I think striding away from those cultural issues and going back to those kitchen counter issues is really the way to go. And that's what we've seen. A lot of the Democrats that have won in these high profile races, I feel like, have been really sticking to that. Yes, there have been a lot of progressives that have won and have been on that progressive leaning on the Democratic side, but it seems like on that progressive message, they're sticking more to those, electricity bills, childcare, and healthcare, and housing costs, like as I was just saying, and as Gavin Newsom was describing, and that's apparently winning across the nation in many states, where we've seen Democrats win in the Trump plus 15 plus 20 districts almost a few years ago. So
And
it's
I
yeah.
want to add that there's also like a big difference between progressivism and identity politics. I mean, I think people would argue that Tallarico, for example, is more progressive than Jasmine Crockett, but Jasmine Crockett is
Yeah.
much bigger on identity politics than Tallarico is.
Yeah.
And sometimes people coincide the two because a lot of progressives will play part in identity politics. Whereas, we've seen multiple examples of politicians who are not like that. Mamdani, Tallarico, and the recent woman to win the primary out of New Jersey, District goals at 10, the recent special runoff,
Yeah.
special election.
Meha. Yep.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of these people who are just focused on the important issues, and as Newsom stressed as well as Obama, where people are rightfully fed up with saying like, what you guys are talking about doesn't actually affect us in the day to day. What we want is somebody who's going to talk about and address these issues that is affecting us, like the cost of living, like the housing costs, like the issues regarding crime and more. And I don't think, it's proven that a big reason why Trump even won in the first place compared to Kamala, a lot of people would just view Kamala more as like that identity politician who was just going to do what
Yep.
Biden did and then add a little bit of that identity politician twist to it, which nobody was really excited for. Whereas with Trump, it was always about like, well, this guy, even if I don't agree with him or like him, he's talking about how how the economy is has an important issue, how the southern border is an important issue, how the crime is something that we need to curtail. Like, even still nowadays, Republicans are favored over Democrats for handling crime. And it's just because of the messaging. And the Democrats
Yeah.
have not done a good enough job messaging to the people saying, like, hey, well, this is what we're going to do to fix this problem. And we're just kind of putting it to the side, not even just not talking about it, but essentially like, let's not talk about it. And therefore, hopefully, people will forget about it. But people can't forget about the issues in their day to day. People can't forget about what goes on in their lives when they go to work, when they're coming back, when they're just trying to go to sleep, or when they're just walking down the street. And I think that I definitely agree with Gavin on this one, but I'm
Yeah.
interested to see how the Democrats as a party actually adjust to this, because we've seen the DNC, for example, they ousted a lot of the progressive Democrats out of the DNC meetings because they were against Israel, whereas the DNC was like, this isn't even a thing for contention. Like, we're not even. It was what's the DNC chair's name? I'm blanking on it right now.
I actually forget the new. There's a new individual who is the DNC chair.
Yeah, he's been in there for like the last like year since the election ended and the Democrats lost. He got put in. Damn, but he during a DNC meeting where they were talking about like which direction the party should be leading, there was a big vote regarding how they would handle the Israel issue, Israel Palestine issue, and there was a vote to condemn Israel, and then there was a vote to prevent weapons sales to Israel. Most people agreed to condemn Israel for crimes against humanity, but most people also then didn't agree to said that, oh well, we should keep sending weapons to them. And it's stuff like it's an example like that where the Democratic Party is clearly in the base is clearly going in one direction, whereas some of the politicians that we have in power are going in the exact opposite.
Yeah.
So there was actually a meeting between the DNC chair and one of the leaders of the young Democratic movement, where
I think
they
it
were
was
just
with
like, "Well,
David Hogg when that happened.
that was around when Hogg left the
Yeah.
DNC, yeah."
Yeah.
And it was just saying like, well, if you guys aren't going to listen to us, then what are we here for? And like, if you guys aren't willing to listen to reason to what the Democratic voters want to see, what are we here for? And we've even seen with the New Jersey 10 election that speaking against Israel is a very popular side for the Democrats to take nowadays. And it may even carry some risk with it, but the risk is more so from a national APAC blowing you out level in terms of advertising and more. But even with all that APAC war chest coming in from the Zionists, we still see these people winning these elections. And I think it's a big thing to look at. Well, why, despite the fact that the financials are not on these people's side, why are they still winning these races that people fear so much to go against? That's the reason why people don't go against Israel, is because they fear the money.
Yeah.
And it's because these people are talking about these kitchen countertop issues like, okay, well, here are the actual issues. This is my idea to fix them. And they actually present them, unlike what we've seen the past few years, which has been a very identity focused, more so than issue focused
Yeah,
politics.
and that's really like how you were saying. That's how definitely Trump won. This past election, because as I've said on the podcast, Democrats were so focused on that level of identity politics, whether, transgender, LGBTQ, you have a place within the Democratic Party, which nothing is wrong with that. But on the Republican side, they basically were just stating if you're just upset with illegal immigration, no matter who you are, or just upset with the economy, no matter who you are, you saw people in troves really pull to that message, and even young voters pull to that message now. A year and 2 months in, it's drastically changed on its head. That's part two, a lot of the policies that have been pushed by this administration. But you can't sully the fact that he did win a lot of key demographics from not the identity politics that Democrats were
He got
so
a lot of
casually
black male and
willing to
Hispanic
run.
male votes.
Yeah, he
Some
yes,
like
no, he
identities that the
very much did.
Democratic Party quite literally clung to, and it's like saying, "Oh, these people are the minorities. They're going to vote for us because we're the party for minorities." Like, no,
Yeah,
you can't just limit lower people to that kind of scale and thinking. And
exactly.
it was very similar with the Muslim vote again with Democrats. They're like, "Well, are you going to vote for?" I heard a lot about this. Just being Muslim and also just being politically active. People would often talk about, well, if you're voting for Trump or not voting for Kamala, just if you're not voting for Kamala, just that in general, it's because you're immoral and you don't care about Muslims, even if you are Muslim, because Trump's gonna be far worse for Palestine and Israel. And at the end of the day, it came down to like, well, just because I am a certain either intellect identity or religion or skin color ethnicity, it doesn't mean my vote's going to go one way, nor the fact that he's saying I should expect it to go one way is very telling in itself. Like when people are telling the people within their own party, like, hey, if you don't vote for this, you're immoral and evil. I'm like, dude, I'm not over here voting. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for
Yeah,
people somebody who I knew was going to defend Epstein was in the Epstein files. But I'm not also going to vote for war criminal 2.0 and Kamala Harris, or after I made my mistake, learning from Joe Biden after he didn't care at all about Israel Palestine. And now people say like, oh, well, this isn't really that big of an issue. It is. It's a massive issue because it's example telling. One, we're seeing how deep the rabbit hole goes with Israel in the Epstein situation, how likely the reason why we're so supportive of Israel and the Palestine genocide is because politicians are being blackmailed for the most part. And two, also just because if you're going to tell people that they're immoral for not supporting genocide, then your argument just falls flat. There's a logical and
yeah.
fallacy there.
I mean, also just look at that DNC secret report that came out that basically, did analysis on Kamala's campaign and actually synthesize what was the number one issue that really derailed her campaign. And I was on the cusp that it would have been, gender identity that would have been the whole thing, like girls in sports, things of that nature would have been the issue because that was such a cultural uproar during the Biden administration and even within that campaign. But it was actually, as Muhammad was stating, the issue of Gaza and the handling of Gaza. That was actually the one issue that really shot. Well, I shouldn't say shot them in the back, but you could say stab them in the back.
My mother
Um,
and father
but
voted Democrat every single year since they've been citizens. Kamala was the one time they didn't vote.
yeah, and that's part of that issue. They didn't stand firmly as a lot of younger voters and even voters like your mom and dad wanted to see from a Democratic president. And they got some of that from the campaigning of the Donald Trump administration, not saying your parents voted for Trump, but I'm just saying some individuals thought in that mindset.
Oh yeah, I know
And
Muslims who voted for Trump for the similar reasons. They're like they didn't agree with what Kamala was saying culturally, and then they're like, "Well, Trump, even though I don't agree with the guy, I do think he'd be better for Israel Palestine," which is something I heavily disagree with, and I think it's very evident that it was wrong. Now, I think both parties would have been horrible for Israel Palestine,
yeah,
and also just like, well, when it comes down to who I culturally agree with more, is it going to be the person who is preaching, identity politics about someone who goes
yeah,
against my values, or is it going to be the guy who may not like me, but also is at least why I think going to take the country in a better direction? And
exactly.
it's even if you disagree with it, you've got to be able to look at how other people think and what's on their mind when they're making these decisions. Because you
Yeah,
may think, well, that's illogical. These people are stupid. These people are wrong. Sure, feel free to think like that. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's not going to get you anywhere. You've got to
yeah,
see why people think the way they do, what makes these voters vote the way they do. And you've got to come on to the ground point blank and say, well, this is what I'm going to take care of these issues. And even if this is what I'll say, honestly, just from a political standpoint, even if you personally think something is right, if 75% of your base says opposite wise, it's probably pretty damn smart for you to say
I
what
was gonna
you
say
think's
that
smart.
reminds me of this the most recent interview of Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee, the
Oh,
man of
that was
Israel.
bad.
And kind of what you're saying leads like made me think about it, because in that interview he actually asked Mike Huckabee, I think it was like 80% of 90% of Americans support not sending weapons to Israel or something like that, or 90% of Americans view the situation in Gaza as a genocide. And then Mike Huckabee stopped him and said, "Well, we don't let political polls dictate policy." Well, it's like, well, this is what the American people populace is stating and saying and feeling about this issue, and you're just going to shoot that down and just say, "Oh, just because it's a bad poll, we don't dictate policy based off
And then
polling."
they'll use polls for arguments when it's beneficial to them.
Exactly. It's not a double standard when it comes to polls good or bad. Like depending no matter what it is, it's still voter sentiment, and he just completely disregarded across the board. But then sticking to kind of the advice that Obama and Newsom have been giving Democrats. This advice comes amid growing pessimism towards President Trump, with recent polls indicating that Americans are increasingly sour on his performance ahead of the State of the Union tomorrow, particularly on issues like inflation and tariffs, where disapproval rates hover around 60 to 65%, opening the door for Democrats in traditionally red areas, some of which include, as we've talked about on this podcast, Texas, Arizona, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa will all be in play in this year's midterms. And Trump's perceived collapse in approval has prompted Democrats to redirect midterm strategy into deeper Republican strongholds, capitalizing on voter fatigue with these policies, as evidenced by surveys showing his approval ratings hitting 60%, the highest since early 2021, and independents dropping support by 15 points. Meanwhile, the blocking of the final report from Trump's classified documents case by Judge Cannon adds another layer of controversy, preventing public release of special counsel Jack Smith's findings, which we did report on that testimony that Jack Smith gave, that scathing testimony that he gave, which critics argue shields Trump from accountability, but could fuel Democratic narratives of obstruction of justice in the lead up to the midterms. And then also looking at various polling, 64% disapprove of the president's handling of the tariffs, a sentiment that's consistent with many demographics, including men, women, racial groups, and educational levels, marking a low point in public perception on his trade policies following the Supreme Court's invalidation of his EPA-based tariffs. As we've stated, Trump's overall disapproval rating has climbed to a 5-year high of 60%, with stark declines among independents and Latinos. And as surveys like the Washington Post and ABC News show, strong disapproval on key issues, where inflation is a 65% disapproval, tariffs at 64%, as we said earlier, foreign relations at 62%, and immigration at 58%, and the economy at 57%, signaling vulnerability ahead of his State of the Union and midterms. And there are multiple Democrats that I believe will just not be attending the State of the Union as well. But we will be reporting on it most likely the day after, unless we can do a streaming of it late night. We'll put out some stuff on that if that's something possible. But this erosion of support, matching levels from his first terms, and underscores broader dissatisfaction with Trump's economic stewardship, where only 39% approve of his job performance, and views of the economy remain poor despite his claims of success, and Pambandi's claim of the Dow being at 500, and potentially amplifying Democratic gains in red states, as polls indicate tariffs are seen as harmful by 56% of constituents nationwide.
The Dow over 50,000
Yeah.
thing makes me laugh so
Yeah,
much.
the Dow over 50,000. But yeah, with all of these ratings and him plummeting left and right with multiple groups, independents, Latinos, men, women across the board, it's looking very grim, and it's more so very likely, not likely, it's almost a lock, as some would say, that the Democrats will take back not just the House, but also the Senate as well. I believe their odds are raising up to 34% on prediction markets, while the Republicans is slowly dwindling as the weeks and months go on. So it's only a matter of time until all this dissatisfaction is turned to the voter box, come midterm elections and come the November 4th general election date for all of these all of these primary elections as well. I mean, all these midterms elections as well. Once their primaries are over.
I mean, I think we're already seeing also a lot of just in general the distaste in the current policies and where the country's being led is already resulting in big votes in the voter box. I mean, we've seen Democrats
Yeah,
either win surprising elections or have like 10 to 20% swings in Trump heavy districts. And I mean, there's what I think I'm most excited to see is really just how the Texas Senate primary goes.
yeah, that's going to
Because
be a
that's gonna be
very, it's going to be a very very interesting to see. I mean, I was watching on TikTok that Crockett, she was at a town hall and she was speaking about her opponent, Tallarico, and was saying that, he's been a state. She was basically stating, when's the last time you've heard of James Tallarico besides this race itself? And she was stating, he's been a lawmaker longer than I have. And I'm like, those are actually very good points to be putting out. I will say, when trying to talk cordially about a primary opponent that's within your same party and also former colleague as well. I think it's a very classy way to do it, but at the same, token, we've talked on this podcast that the Republicans are, you know, um, watering at the teeth to have Crockett go against any one of the Republicans that are in this race for
Paxton
the
or
Texas
Corrigan.
Senate. Yeah, Paxton or Corrin. So it's like we need to go with the individual who's not just going to be strong in the primary and for their constituents and for the nation, but we need to have someone that's going to be a bane in the side of Republicans when it goes to voting in that primary day and or general election. I think Tallarico is really an individual that stands out above the crowd in his views and how he separates church and state and just talks about the importance of religion, but not in the national spotlight. Like how we've seen conservatives and MAGA, most importantly, use religion as a way to give credence to a lot of
Corral
their
voters.
policies, and yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
And I mean,
And
one thing that I really like about Tallarico, I mean, it adds on to the point we were just discussing. And I remember it was a video of Texas State House debating about a law to pass to add the Ten Commandments to every classroom in
yes, he
Texas.
talks about this. Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, I understand what your guys' intentions are, and it's because you want to spread the word of the Bible and of God. But I think it's much more important that we all focus on actually practicing instead of just preaching." And he
Exactly.
was like, "How many?" He was like, how many of us have had, no one has to admit it nor be free to admit it, but I think we'd all agree that there have been multiple people just in politics in general, and even in this house that have, not been loyal to their married partner. People who have coveted wives and people that were not their own, people who have stolen, people who have lied. How many of us have not lied? We're politicians. We
Yeah.
lie even if it's just for a good reason or what we think is a good reason. So he's like, how are we going to tell people to follow these commandments when we don't follow them ourselves? It's a bit hypocritical, and it also is taken away from the point of what it's supposed to be, which is a personal journey of, self introspection, of improvement in faith. And I remember like the speaker of the Texas House was like, "Oh, well, those are all valid points, but they ended up passing it anyway." And it's like, well, first off, there's supposed to be that separation of church and state. That it doesn't really just, if you're going to allow the Ten Commandments to be put up in schools, what happens when you start wanting to put up quotes from the verses from the Quran or the Torah in school? Or what about
Yeah, exactly.
what
Yeah,
about
there
things
shouldn't
like
be
the
like a dominant religion. That's really what he was speaking to as well. And even when he was on, I forget the news show, but he was speaking with Bo Bear, and he was actually sparring with her, saying, your party talks about, all these Christian values, but you guys aren't talking the talk. You guys aren't. I mean, you guys aren't walking the walk. You guys are only stating these Bible verses and things of these nature, but you're not, wanting to feed the homeless, giving, providing healthcare, and things of that
yeah.
nature. Things that in Talarico's words that
If you wanna take away
Jesus,
food from it's from
yeah,
children in
like take
school.
away your food assistance and things of that nature, and just give it to tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires and things of that instances. The way that he frames it is such a very fresh breath of fresh air when it comes to messaging on these issues, especially in a place like Texas as well. So I do believe their race is, I think, Muhammad, you had last said, I think early March, in the beginning of March, I think
It
is their primary,
the
but the
primary
early voting
is
has
March
started.
3rd,
Yeah.
I believe. Let me double check.
Yeah, I think you last stated that early voting has started and that,
Yeah, primary election day is March 3rd, so they'll be
so
counting
yeah.
the votes after that, and then we'll have to see how long Texas takes to count the votes, but hopefully not too long.
Yeah, hopefully not too long. And then continuing to move on, looking at the federal and Supreme Court docket and what's going on the judicial sides of things. So, a federal court in Utah rejected a GOP-led effort to block a new House map that favors Democrats, ruling that the court ordered district which consolidated Democratic voters in Salt Lake County into one district rather than splitting them across four can proceed for the 2026 midterms, denying a preliminary injunction due to the proximity of elections and unlikelihood of success on the merits. So this is another redistricting win for the Democrats. And then as well, in addition, the Supreme Court agreed to hear an appeal from the oil and gas companies, including ExxonMobil and Suncor, seeking to dismiss climate change lawsuits filed by Boulder, Colorado, arguing that state law claims for damages from fossil fuel contributions to global warming are preempted by federal environmental laws and foreign policy powers, potentially impacting similar suits nationwide. Now, I think that's going to be interesting to really see what that argument is, because that's basically stating that any damages from, fossil fuel companies that are related to or that are stated or that individuals are pointing to the levels of global climate change that these fossil fuel companies are contributing to, that there's no damages or no legal framework to hold them accountable for those actions. So I think it's going to be interesting to see which way the Supreme Court will rule on this. I was telling my girlfriend this would basically be like if pharmaceutical companies are basically stating that there's no contributions to the drug epidemic from the level of drugs that they process and put out to their patients, things of that nature. So I think it could have some interesting ramifications if the Supreme Court is in favor of the oil companies that have been bringing this lawsuit. And as well as this lawsuit from the Supreme Court, President Trump has predicted, as well as continuing his attacks on the Supreme Court, stating
He's
that
been
they would,
really attacking
yeah,
them. He's really been attacking them. He's so
yeah,
mad.
this time he's stating that they would rule against his executive order challenging birthright citizenship. That's that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that we were talking about a few months back, interpreting that the 14th Amendment as limited to children of slaves following his recent tariff loss, warned that such decision would benefit foreign nations like China, and criticizing the court for decisions he deemed delirious to United States interests. So he basically was saying that the Supreme Court ruling on birthright citizenship would be good for China and not for the United States, when realistically it is good for the United States, because the Supreme Court is upholding the laws and the nature and the authoritarian nature of the Constitution, and really cementing it as the supreme law of the land, and that the president cannot just left and right try to overwrite it with various rules and breaking um, um, decade old precedents as well. And I'm glad the Supreme Court has been full stop with the tariffs, and hopefully we'll see what comes forth with the birthright citizenship as well as the redistricting ruling as well, because those are the three main Supreme Court decisions that Trump has, well, two that he has left really, that could really shape out his next 3 years of presidency realistically.
And I want to add just, because I think it is extremely clear what the 14th Amendment says. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've heard the argument, honestly, it's usually by, I hate to say it, but ethnic white supremacists that the 14th Amendment was solely due for slaves, the children of slaves and slaves. The wording of the 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So it's doesn't make word, it doesn't specify slaves, doesn't specify any group, doesn't specify anything. It just says anybody and everybody born in the US is a citizen. And the reason why I
I
bring
think
this
it just
up,
follows, I think people will just because it follows the third it's right after the 13th Amendment, so one follows the other. So it
yeah, I
was
mean
like
it was a lot of vote, it was a lot of changes to the Constitution at
so
the same point in
I've
time.
understood Trump's stating of that, but to use that, I think, as the sole basis to challenge it is, I don't think, the right way to go about it, because
I mean
that
the text is very
technically
clear. The text is
right.
extremely clear.
Facts. Like, it wasn't just specifically for slave-owned children, but at that time, it was framed specifically for them, if that makes sense in a way. Like, yes, you had the 13th Amendment with technically emancipated slaves made them free. Then you had the 14th to make them naturalized citizens of the United States. But the way it was written was it to be a general sense that any individual that was born in the United States has citizenship or is a naturalized citizen. So I think I would say, like, he is kind of correct on that, that yes, it was meant for slaves, but it was written in a general sense to encompass
Any and
additional
everybody.
and everybody else and the future. Like I will always say that our founders and individuals that have written these amendments to our Constitution were extremely smart in the language that they used when writing it out, because
Yeah.
they could have made it a lot more narrower and could have just said it was for slaves.
Yeah.
Because then if it was, then Trump technically could be right on this, and the Supreme Court could rule in favor of him. But the fact that the way that they wrote it out leaves ambiguity and kind of what the Supreme Court could potentially rule on as well. But when I found that out, that it was for slaves, because you don't learn that in your regular schooling or even in college, I did not learn that. But when I dove into it, I was like, it does make a lot of
It
sense.
does. But
The logic that Trump is coming from,
with
but
the law,
we're decades from that now. Like, now it's more of a general sense, the way that that language is interpreted.
I mean, especially with law, the text and the specific verbs and words that are used is extremely important. I
Extremely
mean,
important.
yeah, people will split hairs over, if something was said to like to allow versus permit. Like, okay, well, those two words mean two different things.
Well,
Like,
even for when I worked at the Pennsylvania State House as a legislative director, even shall and we,
yeah,
that was even important to get right in various sentences, to make sure that when individuals are reading this bill and agencies are reading the bill, they understand the full implementation of the bill. Now, there's some instances where they want to keep it as open as possible for interpretation and things like that. But this is really not the case as well, because it's, as I was stating, founders wrote it in a general, well, whoever wrote that amendment wrote it in a general sense, but however, it did apply to slaves back then when it first was written. And I want to
yeah,
continue on the Epstein front, because there was another major arrest. Muhammad, I don't have the individual's name. If you're able to pull up his name for me, I believe he was a former ambassador, I believe. But continuing on that, Judge Kanan permanently blocked the release of the special counsel Jack Smith's report on Trump's classified documents, as I was stating.
Baron
And
Mandelson.
yes, Mandelson was arrested as well. So it's now two individuals arrested, and 12 individuals are retiring and or resigning from their connection to the Epstein files. And also, as an important reminder, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are scheduled to provide testimony to the House Oversight Committee in its investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, with depositions set for February 27th and 26th, respectively, in New York. So after negotiations averted contempt charges. So it's going to be interesting. So it's 3-4 days. We'll see when what this testimony is really going to fully be about and what's going to be said. And I'm not sure if it's going to be public, but if it is, we will be listening, watching, and making sure our listeners get that important information.
I hope it is public, because that'll be a juicy thing to watch.
Yeah,
That'd
it
be a
should be
very
public.
juicy
Just
thing.
to
I hope they don't just plead the fifth again and again and again.
No, I don't think that they would. I think the Clintons are truly gonna, put on a show, masterclass show as much as possible,
Yeah.
and really speak truth to power and what they have to say and what they've been constantly accused of, and what's not been articulated in the release documents of Jeffrey Epstein, of their in-depth connection and in their in-depth wrongdoings with Jeffrey Epstein and or the sex trafficking network. And I want to move to economic and global tensions, as the U.S. announced it would cease collecting tariffs deemed illegal by the Supreme Court's ruling effective February 24th, as the Trump administration shifts to alternative authorities like a 15% tariff under different trade laws, which was originally yesterday 10% global tariffs, aimed warnings from dissenting judges about the complexity of refunding over 100 billion to importers. The European Union paused the ratification of its trade deal with the United States, seeking clarity on Trump's post-ruling maneuvers, including the new 15 tariffs, which I said yesterday was 10% tariff, was 10%. So the max that he could go up to with that 1947 law is only up to 15% max. So they're stating that could violate prior agreements capping EU exports at 15% while generating zero duty access to US goods, reflecting broader insecurity and transatlantic relations. And it seems like Republicans are starting to wake up, as never Republicans continue to issue dire warnings about Trump's policies, convening to criticize his party as an authoritarian embracing cult and Trumpism as a essential threat, drawing parallels to post-Nazi recovery and highlighting frustrations with Trump's trade overreach despite diminished influence within the GOP. And EU officials firmly stated that they would accept a no tariff increase following the Supreme Court's decision, insisting a deal is a deal and emphasizing the need for economic stability, as a pause in trade pact ratification underscores potential chaos amid Trump's rapid replacement of invalidated levies. So I've had even individuals on X and Twitter stating that the law that even Trump was invoking, the Trade Act of 1947, was that it's actually still illegal because the United States doesn't have a difference in trade balances, or I forget the language that was actually specifically used, but there is no technically trade imbalances from what I've been looking into from individuals' claims. So it's going to be interesting. The Supreme Courts or federal courts will take up this measure itself and deem that it is unconstitutional for the Trump administration to continue to use this law in this section to continue his tariffs. And with 301, as we said, he needs to provide evidence of bad practices, dishonest practices from countries to the United States to continue these tariffs as well. So what comes up from whether these investigations and or whether or not the Supreme Court will take up this new path that the Trump administration has taken, we'll be sure to have all that information here for you guys as well.
No, it would be interesting to see. All this is going to be this is kicking in at a very interesting time too, honestly, because it's
Yeah.
like a big mixture of wanting to focus on the midterms coming up, but also now like he's taken this as a slight to his authority, and it's a
Yeah, I
good thing
mean,
that the president of
his
any party takes something as a slight to his authority because the president shouldn't have unyielding authority to do whatever he wants at all.
no, he definitely shouldn't. And as we were saying, Gorsuch stated that very clearly in his opinion about the tariffs and even about the independent agencies that opinion as well really detail that they understand how much this president is reaching in terms of breaking precedents and extending his power and extinguishing the power of Congress, and Supreme Court has really been there to stop him and hold him at foot. And it's great to see it because he's put in most of these judges and may get another one depending upon Alito. But it's just it's I would say heartwarming in the sense to see that the Supreme Court is being the bulwark against the levels of expansion that the executive branch is reaching to do. So it is nice to see, I will say. And
It'll
then, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. I don't have anything else to add.
I was gonna say finally we're gonna round off with Iran, U.S., and Mexico chaos. So, Israel's cabinet minister declared that the country will not fund Gaza's reconstruction amid ongoing devastation, while President Trump's Board of Peace explores launching a U.S. dollar-pegged stablecoin to facilitate digital transactions and support Gaza's war-damaged economy, potentially aiding cash-strapped residents and rebuilding efforts. So 10 billion in US taxpayer money sent to the Board of Peace, basically almost a slush fund for interests outside of the United States and just focused on rebuilding Gaza. So that's another 10 billion that we're seeing taken from the Americans and going to be used in a similar manner that me and Muhammad were reporting on the Venezuela offshore account as well. Those two instances are going to be benefiting Americans across the board, long term and or short term, because it's only going to be used to rebuild up Gaza on one end, and on the other end with Venezuela, reconstruct and rebuild Venezuela's oil refineries. So in the short term, there's no real benefit that we're seeing, and this should be a lot more outrage to this that we're seeing $10 billion injected into this boards of peace, and then you have Israel not wanting to be a part of it because Gaza is going to be a focus point and wanting, and the boards of peace is wanting to rebuild the country. And President Trump is chairman of the board, lifetime chairman of the board. So it's interesting to see that Israel is not going to be a part of the board, but yet wants to work with the United States to go after Iran and things of this nature. And we've had individuals on actually our TikTok page talk about the recent clip that we put up stating that Iran isn't an actual threat to the United States. So just providing some additional clarity for that, it's that Iran is a threat to the United States. However, though, it's not a major threat as what's been going on across the globe, where we need to be focusing on the situations that are going on in Gaza and situations that are going on with China and Russia and at home. What's
Iran is less of a threat than North Korea. We
Yeah,
don't know
Iran
that
does have
data.
its proxies that have killed Americans, and I'm not saying that's
It's
not
because we're in the Middle East. It's
yeah.
because we're in the Middle East.
Exactly. If we weren't in the Middle East at almost the behest quest of Israel, then we wouldn't see these levels of atrocities towards our American troops that are over there. So it's not that Iran isn't a threat to America; it's that it's a more so manufactured threat, given our reliance with Israel, Israel's reliance on us, and Israel only really seeing Iran as a threat of a country to Israel's existence. Because when the United States bombed Iran, it was stated we destroyed their nuclear facilities, but now it's stating that they're weeks away from getting uranium enrichment to nuclear sustainability. So it's like, what's the truth here, really? Did we actually, uh, you know, hit them hit them hard enough to destroy their facilities and have and push them back months and months on end? Or are we just, looking for an optimal time for us to go into Iran and try to pose regime change in a country that even Trump's top generals are warning of risks associated with potential strikes on Iran? And U.S. officials confirming indirect talks are set for Thursday in Geneva to discuss Iran's nuclear proposal. But this is amid hopes of an interim agreement before a full deal is even reached. And the U.S. has, since particularly evacuated its embassy in Lebanon, ordering non-essential staff and families to depart due to heightened security risk from Iranian tensions. And then you have um, also Iran heightened security risk, given the reducing of the footprint to essential personnel as a temporary measure while the embassy remains operational. So not only do you have key staff leaving all these facilities and these heightened tensions, you have potentially a deal reached on by Thursday with only being a partial deal, even though there was a deal that the Obama administration had already made with Iran that Trump ended up throwing away. And yes, individuals can say that it only, benefited Iran in some form, but it was a deal at the very least, and at least the framework could have been reworked instead of just throwing it out all together.
Damn. Sorry. Damn. I mean, I do really think that when it comes to Iran, it's difficult to really say that this is about them having nukes when it's more about just them being an adversary to Israel.
Yeah.
And if this was surely about countries having nukes, then Pakistan would be more of an issue. But then you could argue, well, Pakistan's more of an ally to America. Well, then why is it then? But you can also argue, well, these people, Pakistan, for those who don't know, were literally harboring Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
So the argument is like, well, if these people are enemies of the American state, how is the country that was harboring the largest terrorist in American history not an enemy of America? And it just comes down to, honestly, they already have nukes. They can't do it. America and Israel can't fight against them because of that. So it's like, well, what's the next contestant that we have that we've got to go against who is not in that situation? And we saw Saudi Arabia recently partner up with Pakistan, their nuclear arsenal. And so I think that the U.S. and Israel is getting a bit desperate to secure some more control over the Middle East, especially with these developments going on, that they're going to throw whatever they can to see what sticks at the wall and then use that as justification for this attack on Iran. And I hate to chuckle at this, but it's very ironic considering how much Trump said this was a no ending wars administration, and then we see him going very deeply and aggressively with this war against Iran, solely because of what Israel wants. And I mean, we've even talked about how one of Trump's top generals has warned of the associated risk with striking
Yeah.
Iran. And we've even talked about how they thought that they took out Iran's nuclear missiles and nuclear capabilities with their strike back a few months ago. But then they came out saying, "Oh no, that didn't actually this should stop
It
their
was so
impede their
glorified
progress."
that we had this hit. So glorified on the news and everyone talking about we really got them. I was like, we'll see what happens. And where we are, once again stating that Iran is close to nuclear capabilities, which has been stated, especially by Israel, decades, and decades. I mean, they have that video where they played, I think it's almost every few years, Netanyahu saying that Israel is only that Iran is only weeks, months away, years away from a nuclear capabilities, uranium enrichment levels. But it's like, what's really the truth out there? When we know that the truth is that Israel just wants to take out Iran to expand its foothold within the Middle East. But regardless of the fact, theories, and opinions that are out there, we're going to be sure to bring you guys the most important news and most accurate news when it comes to this issue, because we know that this is something that's completely important and really has a strong foothold on American foreign policy, given that these
Oh yeah,
tariffs are now basically dead in the water. So now there's no
yeah.
monetary strong hand that the Trump administration has to.
That's what he was doing with India. He was threatening India with like
Yeah,
50+% tariffs. They bought oil from Iran, and
yeah,
India said like either we buy oil from Iran or Russia. That's what's most affordable and easiest for us. Which one are you going to choose for us to pick? Because we're going to pick one or the other.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
like without that economic, I mean, that's one big thing the US has always done, the West has always done, is that they've threatened embargoes and economic sanctions because they've always been the financial capital and controller of the world. So then to have them lose that control, or at least Trump lose that control through how he's done it for a long time, and now they're going to think, well, what can we do next? And it's kind of funny how the moment the tariffs get struck down, the idea of it bombing Iran on a large scale basis and invading has actually popped up, because he's running out of ideas, then it's what he knows how to do, is to send in the military.
Yep, just throwing things at the wall and hoping it sticks, what it seems
Yeah.
like. And on the last piece that we have here, a U.S. senator has warned that narco terrorists are hunting down Americans in Mexico following violent clashes, where 25 Mexican troops died in an operation that killed cartel leader El Mencho, sparking widespread chaos, including burned vehicles and stranded U.S. tourists in Puerto Vallarta. Believe I might be saying that a little wrong, but my Spanish roots aren't speaking through the tongue right now.
You have
But
Spanish roots?
a little bit of Mexican, probably like 5%. But
Probably like 5%.
probably like 5%. It's what my dad has always
Oh
told
my
me.
god. Imagine
But
someone being like, "Yeah, my great grandpa was black."
no, I mean
So,
I've had individuals tell me like when my I've had longer hair and curly when I was in Puerto Rico with my dad, and people were saying, "Oh, you look like Mexican," in the sense I'm like, yeah, I got a little bit of that in me, a little bit. But yes, the United States with Mexico, killed the infamous cartel leader El Mencho, and that has sparked hours and hours and hours of nonstop violence with citizens in Mexico being killed, terrorized, as I've talked about, burned vehicles and stranded U.S. tourists. After all of this has unfolded, and yeah, it's basically a terror zone right now in Mexico with everything that has been going on, and I think that just happened today, I
yeah,
believe. But
in
as more of
the
that comes
last
out,
24 hours.
yeah, last 24 hours that happened. But we'll continue to report on this specifically and everything that we've talked about today as well. And most importantly, to our listeners, thank you for tuning into Behind the Ballot, where we keep politics engaged, balanced, and informative. Stay curious, stay critical, and stay involved. I'm Mikhail Jenkins, and until next time, keep looking beyond the headlines and behind the ballot.
This is Muhammad Ali. Thank you.